Roberto Bolaños said about Pedro Lemebel, who was born in 1952 and died in 2015, Pedro does not need to write poetry to be the best poet of our generation. His work is difficult to classify because not only he starts making performances and ends up writing chronicles and novels and having a radio show, but also because his whole work could be described in one way or another as performative. Peggy Phelan has defined performance as the art of disappearing because when it happens, it vanishes, which counters the capitalist art market model that demands objects to be sold. As an art of presence, performance art dialogues with the viewer at a discursive and at a phenomenological level. When I mean phenomenological, I mean at the level of the mind, at the level of the body, as an embodied presence in front of an audience. With Francisco Casas, he formed Las Yeguas del Apocalipsis, a duo dedicated to performing acciones, actions, that find a predecessor in Chilean Carlos Lepe, and in the way he had thematized gender and transsexuality as an aesthetic form centered on the body and its boundaries. The CADA, or Chilean neo-avant-garde group that we mentioned in a caption, I mean that Lemebel's literature could easily be characterized as performative too. The theatrical form of his most famous novel, Tengo Miedo Torero, his only novel, or in the fact that Loco Afán, his book about AIDS, was presented as a theatrical piece in Buenos Aires, in the Teatro de la Comedia, in 2011, points in that direction. When addressing Lemebel's work, one must balance his career as a writer and as a performer, as a homosexual body that functions as the collective memory of the general rejection that the heteronormative world inflicts or has of the homosexual individual. And also, that body is the individual memory of the traumas and of the personal desire and delight. The majority of his performances he did between 1987 and 1997 with Francisco Casas, with whom he created Las Yeguas del Apocalipsis. Critics identified around 20 actions, starting by his appearance at the Feria del Libro with a crown of thorns, when poet Raúl Zurita received the Pablo Neruda Award. Instead of handing him a crown of laurels, Las Yeguas gave him the one of thorns, raising the issue of, that we've seen with Bolaño in Maria Casales' scene, the issue of, or doubts about the relationship between art and cultural institutions in the passage from the dictatorship of Pinochet to the dictatorship of the neoliberal market. According to La Época's newspaper, when handed that crown of thorns, Zurita uttered the phrase, "I won't wear it." Let me remind you that Raúl Zurita was married to Daniela El Tit. He was a member of the neo-avant-garde group that fought against the dictatorship. So, I mean, this is the critical and progressive sectors of culture that are adopting different positions about how to position themselves in relation to the art market at the end of the Pinochet regime. A decolonial approach to history is present in almost all their performances. I'm talking about Las Yeguas. In La Conquista de América and in La Refundación de la Universidad de Chile, post-colonial connotations are evident. In La Conquista de América, they dance a cueca on a map of South America. It's an inverted map of South America that is inspired by the work of Félix González Torres, of Joaquín Torres García. Joaquín Torres García, the Uruguayan avant-garde artist. We're talking about the historical avant-garde during the 30s, and they dance all over that map that is spread of pieces of Coca-Cola, a bottle of Coca-Cola of glass. So they dance on blood. The cueca was the dance danced by the madres of the disappeared by the regime of Pinochet. So this is charged with a series of symbolisms. And another performance that is clearly historical is La Refundación de la Universidad de Chile in 1989. We're going to refer to that. Here, post-colonial connotations are evident. In another performance called Homenaje a Sebastián Acevedo in 1991, the reference to the victims of the dictatorship is even more explicit. Let me tell you that Sebastián Acevedo is the father of a disappeared by Pinochet that burns himself alive in front of the Casa de la Moneda during the Pinochet regime. And Sebastián Acevedo is a very important figure along the career as a performer of Pedro Lemebel. Pedro Lemebel uses fire a lot in his performances. The fake and cheap imitation of Hollywood stars appears in Estrellada 1 and 2, and in Lo que el SIDA se llevó, adding to each presentation the elements of a marginalized positioning of the male body. This is also the case in Las Dos Fridas, or the suffering body dancing on a cueca on broken glass in La Conquista de América that I just mentioned. In Lo que el SIDA se llevó, the rage of AIDS is visibilized through a queer parody of the pseudo-glamorous Hollywood red carpets, as well as a local issue such as the closure of the Normandy cinema, which used to be, during Pinochet, a meeting place for a dissident intelligentsia. So what happens in Lo que el SIDA se llevó is that they do the performance at the Normandy cinema, that is a very important cinema for the left-wing critical cultural sectors during Pinochet, that during the neoliberal times is being sold to build a shopping center. And before that happens, they organize this glamorous red carpet that instead of glamorous is a parody of AIDS as something that has been imported like Hollywood to create new forms of dependency. Fernando Blanco says that after the separation of the Shewas, after Francisco Casas emigrated to Mexico, the wounds and human suffering that were central to the performances was transferred to a sort of urban intervention where the use of mass media, such as his radio show in Radio Tierra, that we heard in a past lecture, his journalist chronicles, or his public interventions were key. Those interventions were performative actions too. His public reading of his Manifiesto de mi diferencia, wearing the Soviet symbol of the hoz y el martillo as makeup, or his unforgettable participation at Pedro Carcuro's Televisión Nacional de Pe a Pa, mega popular TV program in November 2000, reminder the most popular presenter in the land, TV host in the land, that his memory was amnesiac and was selective by not remembering the disappearance of his own sister, this in front of millions of viewers. Such event shows that for him the personal was also political, and the lives of the margins reveal almost metonymically the mechanisms and strategies of domination of the system. Throughout his work, we can notice a concern for finding reference that combine revolutionary action with the reivindication of the rights of homosexuals, which leads us to the issue of masculinity in left-wing politics, which, as we discussed already 2 classes ago, in Cuba got to the point of building detention centers for people living with AIDS. For Lemebel, however, the role of art had to be much more radical than just making visible the damage of homosexuals, women, or minorities, but an attempt to link the psychic and physiological vulnerability of the abject victims of identity politics, the state genocide, and neo-capitalist alienation. So what he does with these weak, fragile bodies, or by staging and showcasing the fragility of these homosexual bodies, is that he links minoritarian sex minorities, he links the torture of the genocidal state during Pinochet, and also the new dictatorship of the market that works through hunger and exclusion. Probably that is the reason why Lemebel was not interested in cultural institutions, but in the marginals, the locals, and in women like Gladys Marin that El Che de los Gays told us about when we called him and he answered. And he told us who Gladys Marin was for feminism and for left-wing politics in South America. His latest performance was a photograph where he poses for a friend on a wheelchair by his deathbed. He's wearing a turban and a Palestine mantle with a thick Frida Kahlo-esque makeup, holding a Soviet flag on his lap. He embodies Frida to remind us that death is near. Before starting, Lemebel whispers Blanco, the professor who took the picture, Fer, la Frida no envejeció, yo soy la Frida envejecida. There is no apparent link with the iconic 1989 intervention of the Yeguas del Apocalipsis, where the performers became twin Fridas linked by an umbilical rope, thus as an allegory of the violence inflicted against indigenous women and homosexuals. In several previous performative works, such as Lo que el SIDA se llevó, for example, he places the homosexual body as a place of pain, countering the usual use of drag as a camp spectacle imported from the global north, through the notion of the commercial diva who imposes new demands from the poor violated local Latinoamericana. Back to the hospital, his voice, now metallic because of the tracheotomy that had to be performed in his throat, it becomes a testament of something few people can do: choose how to die. Like Reinaldo Arenas, Néstor Berlonga, Severo Sarduy, or Manuel Ramos Otero, who delved into their impressive ethical promiscuity outside of the normalized circuits of biotechnological surveillance, and allowed themselves to be destroyed by AIDS, by this pink pest that came from the north. Pedro, like them, goes further. He willingly embraces the role of the marginal rebel. He becomes a marginal rebel. Like Jean Genet, Lemebel was since very young marked by the rage against ideologies of class, gender, race, and economy that through damage conditioned his life. But in Pedro, there was choice. He did not allow the doctors to completely remove his vocal cords so as to be able to take through a mechanic device. He did not want to lose his ability to perform until the very end. Both with makeup, topless, with oil painting on our chest and holding hands, they said. The scene is tucked behind the plastic curtain where the original painting was projected. In terms of Gianfranco and Judith Butler, there is a re-elaboration of the abject into something that has political agency. The abject into something that has political agency. His use of Frida continues. A group of photographers photographs, copies her work with her portrait, making the cejas look like the Mexican in Frida 1 and Frida 2 in 1990. Lemebel takes into stage Frida 2 for the inauguration of the 1990 Museo Abierto exhibition at the Museo Nacional de Bellas Artes in Chile. Much later, before dying, he does the already mentioned action where he places the Soviet flag on his lap, echoing his previous use of the Hoz y el Martillo in the photo by Claudia Román that accompany his manifiesto, Hablo por mi diferencia. And that you have among the material provided, you have it in Moodle. Placing the flag on his lap refers to the fact that when the real Frida died, her coffin was covered with the flag of the Communist Party when mourned at the Palacio de Bellas Artes in Mexico City, Mexico DF. The difference between those two occasions is that Lemebel seems to be in control, so his is not a muerte en vida, but a vida en muerte. And in a way, the difference between these two positions, these two strategies, had to do with AIDS. Claudia Donoso and Paz Errázuriz, in their book La Manzana de Adán, a photographic book, referred to the practice carried by a Chilean trans of covering with a bow made of black velvet his mark of masculinity, La Manzana de Adán. This is La Manzana de Adán in Spanish. But Lemebel goes in the opposite way in that performance of the last Frida by his deathbed. Because instead of covering it, and remember that he had a tracheotomy, instead of covering it, he violently removes it and inserts in that place, exhibits the hole. The hole, the second hole, the third hole of the body, the anus, as the other orifice that speaks. So in a way, he puts his anus on his throat and speaks. The other wound that emancipates the poor homosexual in drag. Once Lemebel said, ¿cómo es la vida? Yo arrancado del SIDA y me agarra el cáncer. This means that I managed to avoid AIDS and cancer gets me. By this he meant that illness is an inexorable fate. His insolence discovers his resistance. Lemebel turns the anus into a political organ, able to destabilize the geopolitics of health, gender, and the body. The way La Hoz y el Martillo cut his face like the Joker in his manifesto shows how in Lemebel the body has been a communal space and his actions unveil a somatic type of geopolitics. Gianfranco says that differently from Arenas or Zurduy, Lemebel registers the post-epidemic. That post-epidemic moment Lemebel registers the post-epidemic moment not as the apocalypse, but as neoliberal transformation. Next, what according to Javier Guerrero was a radical emancipation of the anus. This can be appreciated in his chronicles, actions, and interventions. Lemebel rejects anality as expulsion, retention, and understands anality, the anus, as a tool of intelligibility. There is a deconstruction of homosexuality to displace it to a political platform where transgression has nothing to do with being fucked, but with the fact that the proletarian and the underclass anus refuses to be muted, and instead of that races and talks, speaks. According to Javier Guerrero, the nakedness of Casas and Lemebel is the foundation of the yeguas for interaction. For example, the interaction in the performance La Refundación de la Universidad de Chile. They question the foundational virility of Pedro de Valdivia, placing the first stone on which the city of Santiago would be built, as a parody of the foundation of the university, still occupied by the army during Pinochet times. But the whole thing of the university, because las yeguas, through their action, indicate the underlying clandestine link between sexuality and educational space, while anticipating the access of sexual minorities to those spaces. In terms of the university, it's a place of sexuality. And it's a place of sexuality where sexual minorities have the opportunity to access both the expression through their body and also the expression through their mind. Such pulsión anal is a figure of horizontal collectivization of desire as an early activation of the organ of intelligibility. This comes from the debates, the French debates, homosexual debates, with people like Guy Ockenhem or Mario Mieli in Italy. Yo no pongo la otra mejilla, pongo el culo, compañero. I do not show my other like Jesus, like my other cheek. I show my anus, compañero, comrade. In Gloria, and now we have to move to the video that I want you to pay particular attention. Gloria Camiroaga's video, Casa Particular, where she collaborated with Las Yeguas. And in that video, the transsexual prostitute La Madonna, actually, she's a transvestite. She hasn't gone into the transition to becoming a woman because she has a penis. And there is a decolored photograph difficult to identify as belonging to the 1970s or the 1980s. In the introduction of Loco Afán, Lemebel says, reemplazó nuestras plumas por jeringas y el sol por la gota congelada de la luna en el sidario. The feather as an exuberant ornament of the homosexual, and the feather as a pen of the writer becomes the syringe filled with blood capable of injecting and propagating evil itself. According to him, multiculturalism fails at the heart of the homosexual project with the arrival of AIDS. His performative intervention walking down Christopher Street, nearby Stonewall, where the riots started in New York City and started the liberation movement that ends up in Pride, for example, allows him to notice that the gay world, far from including him, excludes him. Walking down the gay stage of Pride in the global north, Lemebel sees S&M shops, but he cannot help to notice the similarity between these tools that are used for pleasure by the global north Americans and Europeans as sex toys, and those tools used by torturers in Pinochet's Chile. He said, in Spanish, pero cuando te bajas del metro en Christopher Street, te encuentras de sopetón con una tonelada de músculos y físico-culturistas en mini short, peladas y con aritos. Las parejas de hombres en patines pasan de la mano sopladas por tu lado como si no te vieran. ¿Y cómo te van a ver si... No, perdón. ¿Y cómo te van a ver si una es tan re fea y arrastra por el mundo su desnutrición de loca tercermundista? ¿Cómo te van a dar pelota si uno lleva esta cara chilena asombrada frente a este Olimpo de homosexuales potentes y bien comidos que te miran con asco como diciéndote te hacemos el favor de traerte indiecita a la Catedral del Orgullo Gay. And adds, sobre todo en esta fiesta mundial en que la isla de Manhattan luce embanderada con todos los colores del arco iris gay, que más bien es uno solo, el blanco. Porque tal vez lo gay es solamente blanco. I'm going to try to translate it on the spot. When you get out of the tube on Christopher Street, you suddenly see this mountain of muscles, muscle Marys and bodybuilders in mini shorts, balls with piercings, and they walk by your side, and they don't even look at you. You're invisible. Well, I mean. Well, how are they going to see you if you are so ugly and you drag yourself around the world with that undernourishment typical of the loca tercermundista latinoamericana? While they are gods in this Olympus of potent and powerful homosexuality, they look at you with disgust and say, we're doing you a favor by inviting you, little Indian, little indigenous being, to our cathedral of gay pride. And actually, the island of Manhattan, during Pride, is dressed with the colors of the rainbow. But actually, the colors of the rainbow in Manhattan are only one color, white, because maybe being gay is being white. This will allow you to understand when he rejects the word gay and he positions that notion of homosexual latinoamericano, of loca latinoamericana. Thus, in his action of 1994, Lemebel shows up in the New York Pride with a crown of thorns, that instead of thorns, has syringes filled with blood, like a third world Christ, but also as a Madonna Dolorosa with a bloody halo, who holds a sign on an improvised piece of cloth that says, Chile returns AIDS. He brings AIDS back to where it belongs. With this, Lemebel suggests a reversal where AIDS is sent back to their true owners, the capital of the empire. In that same sense, he dismisses the names projects, the quilt, of the ACT UP quilt. The ACT UP quilt as a necropolis of skin. To him, this improvised action of resistance in front of the buildings of power in Washington, D.C. embodies capitalist serialization as only form of American discourse. In that action, he wears a corset not dissimilar to that worn by Frida to repair her body, to make of all her dismantled pieces an intelligible silhouette. In his action Alfabeto o Abecedario, done in times of Pinochet, Lemebel wear his emblematic stilettos to inscribe on the pavement the alphabet, delineating every letter from A to Z in fire. This is done on a boulevard of the Panamericana Avenue facing the Metropolitan Cemetery. The burning of the alphabet gains meaning in relation to his essay El abismo iletrado de unos sonidos of his latest book, Poco Hombre, 2013, where Lemebel refers to the veiled censorship imposed by the imposition of the Spanish language after the conquest. Furthermore, as Dieter Ingescheid states, this recalls the call to burn down libraries and cultural institutions by the Italian futurists of the historical avant-garde. In Arder, the the posthumous retrospective exhibition that took place at the Museo de la Memoria y los Derechos Humanos de Santiago a year after his death, year and a half after his death. The action abecedario was present and was presented in dialogue with another action titled Desnudo bajo la escalera of 2014, where Lemebel enters a bag to roll down the stairs sprinkled with an inflammable substance that made the stairs burn. So he rolled on fire. Remember, again, Lemebel's citationism refers to the political gesture of Sebastián Acevedo, who burned himself during the dictatorship to draw attention to the tortures that Pinochet government has subjected his son and thousands of others. His alliance with relevant women like Gladys Marín becomes evident in his Mi amiga Gladys, El amor a la libertad es imparable, his essay on Gladys Marín. Friendship is an ethico-political place, delineating a face and body eager of justice. Gladys never considered herself a feminist, but she indicates with her actions such a transformation into social revolt. Not only Gladys overcomes the boundaries of the patriarchal mandate in the professional world, but she becomes a left-wing militant in the worst possible scenarios. A final mention to finish this lecture, I would suggest very strongly to read Tengo Miedo Torero, a beautiful, beautiful piece of literature. So I need to make mention to the performative in his only novel. And Tengo Miedo Torero from 2001 is a story of La Loca del Frente and her beloved Carlos, a young militant from the Frente Patriótico Manuel Rodríguez, who participated in the failed attempt to kill Pinochet in 1986. Drug is central to the story that passes from chronicle to novel. La Loca's house is flacuchenta, that word, flacuchenta. It's like the house is like skinny and decaying. Very much like the malnourished Loca tercermundista. He describes in his books dedicated to AIDS, Loco Afán, where in his Crónicas de Nueva York, El Bar Stonewall, he points at the difference between gay and loca. The difference between gay and loca that we already discussed. In Tengo Miedo Torero, her poor house is a place of double libidinal liberation. Against Pinochet, and against heteronormativity. This echoes Lemebel's Manifiesto por mi diferencia, where he denounces the complicity between the Communist Party and heteronormative. In the novel, that you do not have to read, but I invite you to do again in the future, two couples mirror different forms of libidinal emancipation. That of La Loca and Carlos, and that of Augusto Pinochet and his wife in real life, Maria Lucia Iriart de Pinochet. Presented as a dystopian marriage that is built through mutual recrimination. In that novel, the performative appears in the introduction of neologisms that made translators in other languages give up when trying to find meaning. For example, the word maricursi. This is untranslatable. Maricursi. Because mari is like marimacho. It's a prefix that we use to camp up, make gay a word from a gay perspective. And cursi is kitsch. So it's kind of like, its translation is camp, but it's not, you cannot translate camp by maricursi. It's like, if you are a local Latinoamericana and you are speaking in that particular context, and you say the word maricursi, it makes sense that it's understood as camp, but you cannot translate that in a book as such, because it doesn't make sense. What do I mean by this? I mean that this word is a word from below that becomes decolonial. This is the colonial performance in action by the sole fact that is untranslatable. The novel is filled with textile references. Her arachnid weaving, La Loca, is used to place herself among those viejas aristócratas que le pagaban bien, but also to draw Carlos closer to her. The allusions to Arachne, Spider-Woman, is mixed with those to Penelope, wife of Odysseus, who waits weaving and unweaving. La Loca deconstructs essentialist notions of patriarchal family by contrast to the dystopian unhappiness of the heteronormative couple, par excellence, represented by Pinochet and his wife. The tongue in Tengo Miedo Torero is more than a means of communication. Its carnality as an organ linked to the sense of taste and sound becomes evident in its description of oral sex performance on members of the Frente Patriótico. If there is sex among them, it is not clear that there's a scene that something happens, but actually it could have been in her own mind. It doesn't matter because there's affection between them. Sex is just, it's additional, but it's not essential. So the Maricursi, the Loca Flacuchenta, and the Loca Latinoamericana become strategies of political intervention through copying and difference. Copying the ideals of drag of the North, but turn it into something trashy, something poor, something that accepts its own difference. Nelly Richard, and you have the readings this week by Nelly Richard. And Nelly Richard in Masculino Femenino refers to this as a strategy of parody, and a strategy of parody through copying in order to revert the sign and position it as an instrument of resistance, of political resistance. She plays it in the context of the Chilean neo-avant-garde. I mean, her effort is to turn Lemebel into part of that neo-avant-garde project, but not project. No, sorry. It's like to make those strategies concise. But Lemebel's work and his performative turn of a voice into an emancipated, poor, underclass anus is one of the most important projects of queerness. The word that he wouldn't like Batato Bare, they wouldn't like that word. They didn't like the word gay. They didn't like the gay activism as such. They didn't like Pride. I personally, I identified strongly with this. I have very strong feelings about Pride as a Latin American loca, as I am. But I don't coincide with that notion of stylistic notion, but I do agree with them in the need to position our difference as a form of resistance in neoliberal times that tends to turn difference into a spectacle or just a niche in the market or fashion. I hope you liked it, and let's discuss it in our seminar Thursday. I see you then. Bye-bye.